Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the first public information session for budget 2023 here at the Sunshine Coast Regional District. I'd like to acknowledge that we have the privilege of living and working on the traditional territories of both the Shishal and Squamish nations. Today's is the first of two sessions, one between now and 1:30. We've got 90 minutes scheduled for today's session. We've got another one planned this evening at 6 o'clock. These will be broadcast live on YouTube and they will be recorded. We'll also be updating our Let's Talk page on budget information for 2023 with the questions and answers received. You will have opportunities to ask questions of folks here during the presentation, and there's going to be three ways to do that. For those of us in the gallery, you'll be welcome to put up your hand and come up and use the microphone there to ask your questions directly. For the people that are within the online environment, you'll be able to either hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can send your questions in using the chat feature. A third option is to raise your digital hand, and when you're recognized, we can promote you into the meeting and you can ask your question then. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize the Sunshine Coast Regional District Directors that we have with us today. In the room, we have our Sunshine Coast Regional District Chair, and the Director for Egmont-Pender Harbor, Leonard Lee. Our Vice Chair and Director for Elphinstone, Donna McMahon. Kelly Bax, our Director from Roberts Creek and online. Justine Gabius, our Director for Half Moon Bay. I'm also supported today by several staff members. Off camera, but right to my right and helping me through this is our Corporate Officer, Sherry Reed. Bryce Vitanen is helping us today. Bryce is our Business System Coordinator. Tara Crosby, our Corporate Services Admin Assistant. And leading the presentation today is going to be Lana Smith, our Manager of Financial Planning. So with that, I will turn this over to Lana to get the presentation launched, and we will be watching to see when questions come up along the way. Thank you so much. Over to you, Lana.
Great, thank you, Dean. Okay, so I just want to thank everyone for joining us for the SCRD budget presentation for 2023. Today, if I can get the slide to move forward, we are going to provide an overview of the SCRD Round 1 budget. We'll provide some information on utility rates for 2023, taxation information ahead of the Round 2 budget, and provide an opportunity to ask questions about proposed projects and the budget on whole. So here's the timeline. We started with the pre-budget, which is our proposed initiatives and preliminary taxation ahead of the budget process. We then go into Round 1, which is our full budget proposals and decisions. We're now in the community presentations and information sessions section. And on March 2nd, we will be holding our Round 2 budget deliberations. So overall, what's impacting this year's budget? We have 176 projects that have been carried forward from 2022 and 90 new projects that are being considered in 2023. In water, we have over $5.3 million in new water projects for the regional water system. We also are looking at additional resourcing to support and complete these 260 plus ongoing projects that we have, and increase costs for ongoing operations and maintenance at all of our facilities and sites. What is costing us more? Construction costs are rising, labor, materials, and transport. Operation costs are rising, insurance, fuel, and maintenance. We're also seeing a very large increase in volume of green waste and the associated disposal and transport costs for that. In 2023, some of the highlights of our new proposed projects are an investment in cybersecurity of $100,000, capital renewal for our recreation facilities and equipment of $5 million, BC Transit with a service expansion and a base budget increase around $570,000. The Seaview Cemetery, in order to provide cemetery services for the residents of the Sunshine Coast, further development of the cemetery is required, as well as over the next 5 years. We have the next phase of the Eastbourne Water Supply Expansion Project and replacement of the ultraviolet system at the Chapman Water Treatment Plant. These are some of the community partners and stakeholders across the Sunshine Coast that we provide funding for. We are looking at about $1.9 million in 2023. After round one, our preliminary operating budget totaled $57 million. This is $5 million higher than 2022. The increase largely coming from water and wastewater services, as well as recreation and cultural services, which does include our 5 community recreation facilities, Dakota Ridge, and the library and museums that we do contribute to. Our preliminary capital budget after round one is $45 million. This is $3 million higher than last year. And this is not all new money. This also includes carry forward projects from prior years. In terms of property tax assessments, we have an overall increase in assessed values of 11.37%. 0.87% of that is due to non-market increase. That's generally related to growth, and the other 10.5 is due to an increase in market values. Specifically by area, we will show a breakdown of where your tax dollars go. For Area A, this is the breakdown of the services that are provided and the percent of the tax dollars that go to each service. Represented in a different way, this is the tax amount you would pay per $100,000 of assessed value on your home if you lived in Area A. In 2023, we saw an increase of $5.76 per $100,000 of assessed value over 2022. Largely, this increase is being driven by an increase in solid waste, rural planning, and community parks. We also show on the bottom there an average tax increase based on the different values of homes for illustrative purposes. Similarly, in Area B, we have a breakdown of where the tax dollars go. And the proposed taxation in Area B is actually showing a drop per $100,000. This is due to a one-time project that we had in 2022 for the redevelopment design of the fire hall. As that cost has now dropped off, there is a drop in the $100,000 for Area B residents. Area D, similar slide, just showing the breakdown of the percentage of where the tax dollars go. And again, represented per $100,000 of assessed value. $6.54 per $100,000 in Area D, largely driven by increases in solid waste, rural planning, and community parks. Percentage breakdown for Area E. And overall in Area E, we're seeing an increase of $7.31 per $100,000 in assessed value. Largely the same costs that are driving the other areas, which is mainly the solid waste, community parks, and rural planning. But Area E also saw some additional street lighting project costs in 2023. Area F's breakdown of where the tax dollars go, and by 100,000 K for Area F as well. $4.62 per $100,000 of assessed value. Again, this is very similar to Area E, with the main drivers being the same and some additional street lighting projects in Area F as well. Shell Nation Government District, same breakdown for where the tax dollars go. Here, the difference is $3.02, and largely the driver here is solid waste being the largest contributor to the increase per $100,000. Town of Gibson's. There is a drop here of $1.10 per $100,000. This is due to the town of Gibson's having a higher increase in percentage terms in their property values. So the dollars paid per 100,000 drops to level everything out. District of Sechelt, breakdown. And the breakdown per $100,000. So $2.45 here, solid waste being the largest contributor to that $2.45 in the District of Sechelt. This is the water rates. So these are the user fees and parcel tax that we are seeing. Some of the three biggest projects that are driving that regional water increase would be that Chapman UV replacements, the Eastbourne groundwater supply expansion, and the dam safety upgrades at Chapman and Edwards Lake. That's contributing to a total increase of $211.29 in the regional water system. Community recreation has remained relatively flat compared to 2022. There's been a small change in the garbage and food waste collection rates. This is $9.68 per household. This is just for areas B, D, E, and F only. Over our 15 collective wastewater facilities, user fee increases have ranged from 0% to 63%, and frontage fee increases have ranged from 2% to 66%. So that's a very high-level overview of our budget going into round 2. We will have budget deliberations again on March 2nd, and we are looking to have final budget adoption by March 23rd.
All right, thanks very much, Lana. I don't see any questions online. Is there anyone sitting in the gallery that has any questions they'd like to ask of either staff or your elected representatives on the budget for this year? Yeah, feel free to come up. We can hook you up with the mic so people can hear.
Thank you. My name is Elspeth Richmond, and I'm from Roberts Creek. And I've been a library user since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I've also worked in libraries right across the country. One of the libraries I attended in Montreal was open 24 hours a day, and it was busy all the time. So I'm very concerned as a library user, as a grandmother. I've been involved in a lot of children's programming in libraries, and I was very disappointed to see that the funding for the libraries was being decreased. I don't know what you can say to me about that. I'm very disappointed not to see more people here today. But I'm wondering, what could I do that would persuade you not to decrease the funding? Should I get a petition up? Because I'm absolutely willing to stand on street corners and collect names. I want to have some input in this decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Just before you sit down, was this libraries in general, or was it a specific library?
It's libraries in general.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your question. Who would like to take a stab at that one? Director Kelly Bax.
Hi, thank you for your passion for the libraries. I feel very similar to you. I feel that they are a treasured public space. It's my understanding that the funding for the Seashell Library has been decided. Is that true? We are currently in an agreement, a multi-year agreement with the Seashell Library over their funding model, and apparently we can't do anything about that. I'm just going to go on to the fact that the funding for the Gibson's Library is still going to round 2, and so it's still something that's in negotiations, and I'm fighting hard as I can to try to give them a fair and equitable agreement to help fund them this very important public space.
Thank you, Director Bax. Chair Lee, did you have anything you want to add?
Yes, I'd like to clarify the comments. We didn't decrease the funding. It's not a proposed decrease funding for the Seashell Library. That's the one I'm most familiar with, of course. It's actually, we have a long-term agreement that we put in place for the Seashell Library. It started actually way back in 2014, where we increased the funding over and above the cost of living because they were it was felt by the board that they were underfunded and they needed more money to bring themselves current. And so we had a 5-year agreement with fairly significant increases. Then we've signed another agreement between 2019 and for 5 years anyways, it's good for 2 more years, which was an increase of a set rate which we felt would be higher than inflation. And the intent was to bring them up to a higher level still. Right now, we're honoring our agreement. There is a signed agreement that's in place for everybody, and we're honoring that agreement, and I believe it's a 4% increase for this year, the way it is right now. There is a clause in the agreement to reopen negotiations, but budget time is too late for that kind of thing. It's reopening a multi-year agreement requires all of the individual funders to agree. And the SCRD and our municipal partners are all part of that agreement, and they all decide separately and fund separately, but we're all part of the bigger agreement. So what you can do for the Seashell Library, I'm not sure. I just wanted to make sure you understood what we're into now. And yes, I'm a big supporter of the library. I was a supporter of the agreement at the higher level. So I guess we'll see how it evolves. Our Director Gabius is also our current representative to the library. I don't know if she wanted to weigh in or not.
Oh, sure. Oh, got echo. What do I do?
Yeah, we're not hearing you, Director Gabius. Why don't we go to Donna, who's got her hand up, and then we'll come back to Director Gabius after Donna McMahon.
Yes, as a former chair of the board of the Gibson's Library, I feel like I am compelled to comment. And I might point out that I voted in favor of their initial request at round 1 budget. This really is a crunch year. Everybody is getting walloped by inflation, by contracts coming in much higher than anyone expected, by global supply chain issues and so forth. And at the same time, there is a lot of price sensitivity out there in taxpayer land because people are being hit with, rising cost of groceries and other critical expenses. So it's very unfortunate that this was a year that the Gibsons Library had a much higher than usual budget request. And I feel that they are doing their very best and that it was a reasonable request, but we are going to be having further conversation about that at round 2. We don't, incidentally, the libraries, both of them, are public library associations. So we provide funding, they decide how to spend it. We do not tell them where to spend their money, and we will never do that. So I think that's about as far as I want to go right now, but yeah, the libraries, the other thing I did mention at round 1 budget, and I hope there's an opportunity, increasingly the libraries are becoming refuges. Like when we had smoke, the terrible smoke situation, and when we had the heat dome, it's one of the few public spaces with air conditioning and air filtering. So people are using the library as a refuge when, in times of need. And that's not recognized in how they're funded. And so I'm hoping that the province, under the new emergency management legislation that's coming forward, might consider providing more funding to public spaces that are essential for our community.
Yes, let's check in with Director Gabius if your mic's working, but you can unmute and then we'll go to Director Bax.
Okay, let's try this. Apparently I have to talk through it and hope it works. Know that I can add much more than Chair Lee. Really annoying.
Yeah,
That Chair Lee and Director McMahon had to share. I am a big user of the library. I love them. I've used them all my life, and my cat also does seem to want to get involved. But I knowing that there was an agreement in place, it seemed fair to honor that agreement. But I am happy to work with the library to help them out any way that they need, and I will pass it on to Director Bax. As I don't know if you can even hear me.
no, we heard you okay. Thanks so much, Director Gabius and Director Bax.
Yeah, your audio seemed to repair itself later in that speak. I just wanted to bring the public's attention to the fact that there is a third library that Roberts Creek pays into, and it's the little library at the Three Corners in Roberts Creek. Sometimes they call it the reading room, but it's a wonderful little space. And as far as I know, they received their funding ask. What they asked for their budget increase this year was given to them.
All right, thank you for that. I see Director McMahon's hand up. Please go ahead.
And Pender Harbor, they have a reading room too. I believe they got the funding they requested. Director Lee.
Yes, I will point out, yes, we have a reading room in Pender Harbor, which it's well-attended local people, but the Seashell Library does support us by shipping books up and down as required. And it's they're kind of an outlier of the Seashell Library. But they got the funding they requested, but they actually didn't request more. So anyways, that's how that budget worked.
Thank you for that clarification. It's interesting when we're talking about libraries and when you think back to all the slides that Lana was going through, you'll notice that in a lot of cases, one of the largest places where your tax dollars go is to public recreation, including your recreation centers, your libraries, different things like that. And that's actually quite common throughout British Columbia and local governments, especially outside of major urban centers, because in smaller communities, and in a lot of ways, the Sunshine Coast is a series of smaller communities, we need those public recreation infrastructure centers and public places that are available to fill that need. We don't have a lot of private ice arenas or private swimming pools or private fitness clubs even, like you get in a lot of other places. So you will notice in a lot of municipal and regional district budgets that a big chunk of the money actually goes to supporting these incredibly important facilities for all the residents. I do not see any additional questions right now, either in the Q&A or in the chat. And I certainly don't want to throw any of the directors on the spot. I don't know if there's anyone that just wanted to share some thoughts about the 2023 budget process or anything for this year. Director Lee, he's going to wade into the fray. Well done.
I did want to mention that for all areas, each home receives various services. So when we try to give you an average increase, for instance, in Area A, I believe my last calculations were an increase of between 4% and 15%. And so it depends on what service you get. And I'm a big supporter of the regional system because of that. When we say we're going to tax to pay for a service, that's exactly what we do, and we report back on it. And so these services are paid for by the people that use them, which I think is a really great thing. Of course, it does put you in a bit of a box when you have large demands on one service like water, but that's just part of the system. There's goods and bad of all systems. That's my general comments on that.
Thanks so much for that, Director Lee. Oh, a question from the gallery. Please come on up. Thank you. And if you could state your name and maybe what part of the Sunshine Coast you're from. Thank you very much.
Yes, good afternoon, board members. Thanks very much for having the information session this afternoon. My name is Michael Sanderson. We live in Area E, Elphinstone, and it's our first time to attend one of these meetings, so bear with me. It's just really more of a general question, clarification. It's probably buried in the details of the budget, but I'm just curious, or we're curious to know whether what the reason is for the somewhat higher tax levy increase for Area E as compared to some of the other areas in terms of projects that are going into that area compared to other projects in other areas. So maybe if we can get some clarification of that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I don't know who would like to take the first crack at that. Lana, Donna? Lana, why don't we give you first crack and then Donna can go after that.
That sounds great. I'll try not to steal your fire, Donna. So for Area E, the increases we saw, as mentioned in the other areas, solid waste is a large increase, rural planning and community services. But specific to Area E, we also saw an increase in the Wood Creek Street lighting project. There was actually a surplus of funds last year that were not, in 2021, there was a surplus of funds that were not used, which made 2022's budget be very low. And now in 2023, we're back to more of a normal budget, but on a year-over-year basis, it looks like a large change when really what we're comparing is a year that had excess funding to a year that now has a normal amount of costs.
Thank you for that. Director McMahon?
Sure. Well, part of it was the assessments. The property assessments rose, I think it was more than average in Area E, so that means that we have a slightly larger piece of the pie to pay for, unfortunately. My assessment certainly rocketed up this year. And we are fortunate enough to be in pretty much all of the expensive services for the Sunshine Coast, like solid waste and regional water, and of course recreation. So we are just lucky. We're getting it in both directions. Is there a comment on our situation relative to the assessment on the Sunshine Coast? I'm pretty sure we were higher.
Thank you very much for that. We do have a question that's been sent to us through our Q&A page, and it's from Connie Jordison. Given ongoing escalations in operating costs, is the SCRD looking for new funding sources to take some pressure off taxpayers? And if so, how is that being done? Who would like to? Okay, we'll start with Director McMahon.
Oh, I love to complain about the regional district system. Much more so than municipalities, we are very heavily reliant on property taxes. Property taxes, user fees for certain services like water or wastewater. And then after that, we apply for grant funding from senior government. And that's kind of the choices that we have. The Union of BC Municipalities did a report a few years ago on fiscal fairness, I believe it was called, because local governments, we do a whole lot of work and we get a very small share of tax funding compared to senior government. And increasingly, senior government has downloaded responsibilities on local government that we are stuck with covering through property taxation, which is not income-based. So I know that there is a lot of behind-the-scenes lobbying. Can I say lobbying? Advocacy is the more polite word, going on at the province to try and get more sustainable funding for local governments. The system whereby we have to apply for grants is onerous because there's a lot of work involved in writing all these grant applications, and the burden is the worst on the smallest communities because they don't have the staff to put the time into writing these grants, and then we're forced into competing with each other for provincial and federal money, and frankly, I don't think it's a good system. I don't know what Chair Lee has to say.
Go ahead if you'd like to add in something, Chair Lee.
Yes. Donna just set me up. I am forced to agree with her that the challenge of qualifying for grants and the time it takes is really, you can't plan on them and you never know when they're coming, and you got to be ready and then wait in order for them. And in some cases we can't be ready and waiting. I point to water, where normally we probably would have got a grant, but we had no choice. We need to go ahead. And also I would point out that the government will put new regulations in that are extremely appropriate, but we don't get extra funding when they come in. We just have to increase the taxes in order to meet them. And one of the ones that's quite obvious is the water license regulations, and the fact that the government is making sure that the water is shared equitably and fairly, and we aren't using it all up so it goes away and you don't have it anymore. But those things, well, they're very important to increase the cost because we have a ton of new testing to do to bring a new well in, for instance. And it takes a lot of time, which ties up our staff, which is all cost. So yeah, I'm whining about new regulations and how we have to cover them with taxes. But I guess whether you pay it direct to the provincial government or you pay it to us, I guess it's pretty much the same thing. But I just wish that the grants were automatic to come rather than we having to do quite an onerous process to get them.
Thank you for that. I guess the one thing to add to that as well is that these grants, the question was specific to operational costs, but a lot of the cost drivers are related to capital projects as well, and the grants are typically not available to fund or offset the costs of operations. That wouldn't be typically eligible. Most grants would be for capital projects. And then you're in a competitive pool that is typically incredibly oversubscribed for the amount of money that's available in a given program. You don't know for sure if you're going to get the funding, so at budget time, you're often put into a situation where you have to tax for the entire amount of the project, hoping that it may be magically offset later if the grant funding is successful. And even then, you're still left usually providing financial reporting for up to 5 years after the grant has been granted. So there's a lot of sort of staff time that goes into the whole grant process. It's something that we try to be as shovel-ready, I'm using my air quotes, as we can, so that when these funding programs drop from the sky, and typically great funding programs can drop from the sky with 4 to 6 weeks notice to get your shovel-ready project completely into the queue for funding that you might hear about 8 months later. So we try to do our best to be as ready as we can for opportunities that arise, but it's an ongoing sort of difficult puzzle / dance when it comes to trying to offset project costs with grant funding. Okay, I do not see any more questions in the Q&A. I don't see any questions in the chat. So I think with that, we're probably pretty much through session number 1. I want to thank everybody that came live in the conference room with us today. Thank all of our directors and staff who were here, and what I'm assuming are the thousands of people watching on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed that. We'll be back at 6 o'clock for a virtual session this evening. There won't be an opportunity to be live in the gallery, but tell your friends. We'd love to see more people on tonight's session, and thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.